Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our host and our guest for today. Hi, everybody. It is Katie Koestner, and this is the Dear Katie podcast. Thank you all for continuing your healing journey with us. And I always recommend that you take a moment for good self-care, either at the start or any time during this podcast. If you need to take a break, get some fresh air, take a walk, do a handstand, eat some chocolate, whatever works for you, that is really important. And if you need some ideas for resources along the way, please head over to the Take Back the Night website and you will find a plethora of options. Our very amazing special guest today is Dr. Sabina Mauro, and I'm going to share a little bit about Sabina and her background so you can know what we're going to be talking about today. So Dr. Sabina Mauro is a clinical psychologist. She specializes in treating trauma survivors. While definitely sexual assault trauma survivors, she also works with other types of trauma survivors. She operates her own private practice in Yardley, Pennsylvania, which is kind of on the Philadelphia end of Pennsylvania, for those of you who want to know. She's a published author of 2 books and has been featured on various websites and topics related to PTSD and trauma. She's been a guest speaker. She is a member of the American Psychological Association, the Pennsylvania Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. She also is an adjunct professor and teaches at the undergraduate level too. So today, just for foreshadowing, we were going to chat about what it is like to seek therapy, and as a survivor, what you might expect along the way with your healing journey, with someone kind of there to guide you who has professional expertise in traumatic stress disorder. So welcome, Sabina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So I think I always like to start out with kind of, did you grow up in Pennsylvania? How did you choose the fields you are practicing in? What was that initial life journey like for you at the start?
Sure. So I'm actually an immigrant. I came from Poland. During my childhood, I moved to the United States. And then when I went to grad school, I landed my internship at a facility with specific focus on treating trauma survivors. And so when I started my work there, I really enjoyed the work that I did there. I stayed on to continue with my postdoctoral experience there, stayed on to do some individual therapy as well as some supervision. And then I realized that there was a need of this type of work in Bucks County. And that is how I started my private practice. And so I continue to treat trauma survivors.
Yeah, that's amazing. So was there anything, you said need, you saw there was a need. Was there anything particularly that drew you to working in that specific field or with that type of individual experience?
It was more of the way I like to look at it is when the clients come into my office and, kind of, right, seeing them as this caterpillar on a branch And through our work, just watching them evolve into a beautiful butterfly, to be able to set themselves free from their past is one of the most touching and rewarding experiences for me. And to be able to witness this myself with my clients is what draws me to this type of work. Um, and I tell my clients this all the time. I wish I had the session recorded of us at the beginning where you were this caterpillar and you've evolved into this beautiful butterfly, because it is, like I said, it is very rewarding to be a part of the healing journey where it feels like there's no hope. It feels like I
Hmm.
can't get better. It feels like I've been with this my entire life. And to be able to have the freedom to free yourself from your past.
Well, when your clients walk in the door, and it seems they're in a dark place, how do you think they even get the courage to initially contact you and come in through that door? If it feels like, are they feeling hopeless and desperate, or are they like optimistic, or what's that initial experience like, and what brings them to you?
Sure. So as we know, right, with trauma and PTSD, a big kind of symptom that keeps the trauma kind of alive is the avoidance, right? And so when clients contact me, they kind of know what my work is and my background is. Just kind of me being aware of that. I do know that there is some kind of history that they're coming in with, but that's not where we start off with. The
Mm.
primary focus on is building our relationship to make sure that they feel safe to be able to open up. And I meet them where they are at. So it is not a place where my work with my clients is not a place where they feel forced to talk about what they've been through, because that is not easy.
Mm.
And so I meet them where they are, how they're feeling in that moment, what they want to share with me, and then we take it from there. It's a gradual process. And when we do work through the painful experiences, right, the painful emotions, we prepare for that. We start with working on tools. So I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. I primarily work with our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. And after any traumatic experience, right, our thoughts change, the way we feel start to change, and that impacts the way we behave. And so we spend a lot of time just, at the beginning learning about, well, what is trauma, right? And for a lot of survivors, it can feel very normal what they're going through. Like, what do you mean people don't have nightmares, right? What do you mean that people just don't sit with the exit sign right next to them? Because if they've had this as part of their entire life, it feels very normal to them. And again, right, what they went through, Viktor Frankl, right, an abnormal experience that they've encountered to have normal reactions. But anyway, like I said, I prepare them. And so when we start therapy, we also work on identifying these thoughts, identifying these feelings, and giving them tools as well as coping strategies to help them process the painful experience. And ideally, what we want to do is, help separate the past from the present, because our past can tend to follow us into the present moment. Um, and so we want to, separate what is part of the past versus what is the present, because a lot of the times, or I should say, it's not uncommon for the trauma survivors that I see to feel defined by what happened to them. And so we want to make that clear distinction that, this is a personal experience that has happened to you, but you don't have to be defined
Let's
by what
let's
has
yeah,
happened to you.
let's talk more about what that means. I think that's so interesting, Sabina. Um, when you say defined by, do you find that some of the clients are like they 24/7 are kind of living in their trauma, or does that mean that they feel like that's their primary identity over saying being a parent or being a professional? Like, is it what's setting like the third eye center is that identity? How would you describe it?
Sure. So after traumatic experience, we encounter what ends up happening. It's all internal.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go through a traumatic experience, it's not necessarily visible to the eye because everything that's changed is changed inside of us. We have a dysregulated nervous system, and there's a rewiring in the brain. And so now the way that I look at myself, the way that I look at others, and the way that I look at the world is from a very different perspective. It's from a very unsafe perspective. And so, when we encounter a traumatic experience, right, the world hasn't changed, right?
Mm.
People haven't changed. Things happening in the world haven't changed, but to us, everything has changed. My conversations are no longer the same. My sleep is no longer the same. The way I see myself is no longer the same. So when we feel defined by it, it means everything that is happening around us and to us is through the lens of what we went through.
That makes a lot of sense, Sabina. And then now my brain went to, is it possible to parse out each of those things and say, like, let's think about just sleeping differently, or let's think about like the exit sign? To this day, I still need to sleep near the exit, like wherever the room is, like I'm the closest one to the door or the window if I can jump out, which sounds a little, I think it's subconscious, but I don't mind that so much but is it possible, just to think with our survivors listening, is it possible to just redo one aspect of how we've rethought about one thing, like our body, getting clean all the time, or hating to feel sexual, or how I sleep, or, is it more holistic? Or do you find that people do well if we just focus on one thing at a time?
So healing is a lifelong process.
Okay. So we can't
Healing,
fix one thing at a time. It's not a check. Got that done. Got that done.
it's a lifelong process, meaning that it's not linear, right? We're gonna have our ups and downs. And right, healing involves resetting our nervous system, rewiring of the brain, right? So when I talk about our nervous system, for those of you who might not be familiar with that, we have a fight or flight nervous system within us. And so that nervous system is responsible and activates during times that we feel we're in danger, or, or like I said, in times when we're feeling in danger. To give you an example of how this might work, if we take trauma out of the picture, let's say you are driving a car, you're feeling very tired, and there's a car in front of you, and you have to hit your brakes really hard because you almost got into an accident. And so in that moment, your fight or flight response gets activated because you're feeling like you're in danger, right? And so you're no longer feeling tired. Now, when this accident is cleared and you realize that I'm safe, your nervous system goes back to normal functioning. For trauma survivors, this nervous system, unfortunately, has a very difficult time coming back to baseline, meaning resetting itself. And so the healing is lifelong because it's about resetting the nervous system and rewiring the brain. With traumatic experiences, we all have trauma triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And subconsciously, when we're not aware of these triggers, we end up reacting to them. And why I say trauma healing is lifelong is because we're always going to have trauma triggers, right? What's important, and this is where my treatment also comes in, is we spend a lot of time identifying our trauma triggers because they vary every single day and they're going to be different every single day. Some trauma triggers are going to be powerful, other trauma triggers are not. And, part of the therapy is teaching ourselves how to become aware of a trauma trigger so that we learn how to respond to them instead of react to them.
Hmm.
Because for us, the trauma triggers are misperceived signs of danger, and that's how our brain is actually interpreting them. And so we have to reprogram our brain, reteach our brain that, sitting by that exit sign is not a danger. It's associated with my trauma and the trauma that I experienced. If right, if let's say if I'm walking and I get attacked, right, and I'm holding a Starbucks in front of me or drinking my Starbucks coffee, um, and I develop trauma from that, right, PTSD from that. That Starbucks coffee is now going to be a trauma trigger for me. Why? Because I was carrying it the day that I was assaulted, right? And so for my brain, in that moment, my brain is saying, hey, stay away from Starbucks, stay away from that coffee, because remember, when the last time you got hurt, you had that drink in front of you. And so part of our work is to teach that brain to understand that, yes, you are carrying that Starbucks coffee with you, but it is not dangerous. This is just a cup. It's just a coffee. And so race healing is lifelong because these trauma triggers are going to be there all the time. And it's for us, it's teaching ourselves how to identify our trauma triggers so that we can learn to respond instead of react to them.
Nice. So that was a really helpful example with the Starbucks, Sabina. I could really
Mhm.
see that. Um, what sort of, is it all cognitive, or, do you ask, I'm using the Starbucks, like, is it
Sure.
helpful to have a survivor then carry around Starbucks all the time, like 24/7 until it becomes associated with something different? Like, how do you reprogram that?
So this is going to vary this varies by every client. I just want to also be clear that my treatment or the intervention that I use might not be effective for every trauma survivor. Right? We're
Hmm.
all different. We're all unique. We
Hmm.
have different traumatic experiences. Right? A lot of factors that play a role, and so not every intervention is going to work for everyone. And so it's really exploring what intervention is going to work best for me. But in the situation with this, like Starbucks coffee, if we're going to use that example,
Hmm.
um, that would be a form of gradual exposure, where I would ask my client to first we would talk about what does this cup mean to you, right? Where did this thought come from, and why do you think you have this thought? Now let's tie what emotions are tied to it, right? Is it fear? Is it guilt? Is it self blame? So we would explore the feelings tied to this emotion, to this cup. And then we talk about the behaviors. Well, how do you approach a Starbucks cup, right? Do you avoid it? Do you distract yourself from it? Do you walk away when somebody else is holding that Starbucks? So we would explore, right, the thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors that are tied to it. And down the road, I might ask you, let's look at a picture of a Starbucks coffee, right? And so we want to start this work in therapy because it's a controlled environment, so we can work through it. And then, when we do work in therapy, we also want you to apply that outside of therapy, so that rewiring can grow kind of stronger too. And again, right, gradual process here. So I might ask you to look at a picture of the Starbucks coffee. Then I might ask you to maybe walk by a Starbucks place. Then I might ask you to, grab a Starbucks coffee. And so, right, the idea behind that is that we're rewiring the brain to recognize that this is just a Starbucks coffee. I don't have to be afraid of it. I'm not going to get hurt by drinking this Starbucks coffee.
That makes a lot of sense, Sabina. That was really helpful and so concrete. I think our listeners are really going to get a handle on that. Um, I think other things that maybe we could talk about are, you started out with the caterpillar to butterfly analogy, which I love. along, as this, butterfly is unfurling the wings, what are some, you know, benchmarks and, highlights or, steps along the way for our listeners who are thinking about therapy? Like, what can they look forward to? Are you usually seeing people once a week? I hate to be very specific, but some people don't really know. So is it usually once a week? Is it helpful to do in person on Zoom? There's better help now out there, like the online platforms. Let's talk a little bit about like just the actual logistics of getting
Sure.
therapy.
So again, right, it's going to vary per client, but typically we start off with weekly because the goal behind that is to really teach yourself how to become your own therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so that when you are outside of therapy, you have the tools for your healing process.
Mm-hmm.
We start out on a weekly basis, and then as you start to make progress, we then transition to every other week. Again, right, gradual process here. Transition to then once a month, and then maybe like every other month until you believe in yourself that you have the tools needed to free yourself, to be that butterfly and right transition to thriving in this world rather than feeling like we're constantly just surviving. Therapy is also, there is no timestamp for therapy. There is no timestamp for when to start the healing process. You can be that caterpillar when you are 10 years old, you can be that caterpillar when you're 30 years old, or you can be that caterpillar when you're 60 years old. And like I said, there is no time frame also for how long we're going to be on that branch for.
Mm-hmm.
Is my healing 6 months? Is my healing 2 years? Well, right. Again, I said healing is not linear, but to become that butterfly, therapy can be a year long, right? You might find yourself doing well and you're like, okay, I got this. And then, a year or two down the road, a new trauma trigger might surface. And it might be so powerful that maybe the tools that you currently have are not working. And so it's always okay to come back to learn additional tools.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense as well. Um, Also, I guess, what about ongoing trauma? Like, meaning some of our listeners are in abusive relationships. It wasn't just one experience that was over. Do you work with survivors who are in ongoing harmful situations?
Um, I do, and in those kind of situations, it's really about the safety of my client, and right, that's where you focus on is making sure that the client is safe before we can even start any trauma work, because it becomes again, right, it becomes much more difficult to do trauma work when you're actually in a dangerous situation. And so we want to focus on resolving that first and making sure that there is safety before even doing any trauma work.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense too. What I guess another question is when, I'm sure it's really gratifying to have that butterfly experience with clients and they are internally grateful. What are the sorts of things that they kind of say, like, wow, this is my aha moment. This is what I'm able to do now that I wasn't able to do before. Or like, what sort of things are you hearing after they've been through, a year with you?
Again, right, it's going to vary client by client. It's going to vary by the trauma experience. But, hearing things like setting healthy boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
hearing things like identifying my own trauma triggers, hearing things like, at the beginning when we started, I had no idea what my emotions were, what they meant. And today I was able to understand my emotion. I know where it's coming from, and I got a better handle on it. Hearing things like, I don't have to grab that drink because I'm sad or I'm hurt or I'm blaming myself for that accident.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it varies per survivor.
Nice. But those are very helpful things. I mean, they're very specific and tangible. So I think our listeners will, think about whether they want to see themselves in that position. What are some of the setbacks you sometimes see? Like, as someone's going through a process with you, for survivors, what have you seen as samples of like, oh my gosh, I thought I was doing so much better, and you mentioned like uncovering new traumas, or is there anything else that you see that sometimes is a setback, or new people in their lives, or what kinds of things, have you seen hurt that progress?
So I wouldn't call it necessarily a setback.
Mm-hmm.
I typically like to refer it as, we all fall down,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes it just takes a little bit harder to get back up, but that fall had to happen in order for us to get back up stronger, maybe more courageous. And so what I will say this though, right? Like this work is not easy. Um, Coming into therapy, right? We're not coming into therapy to talk about the most wonderful things in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
These are some of the most painful memories that we have, some of the most difficult feelings that we have. And now feelings are normal, right? Even the negative ones, sadness, anger, irritability. However, when those feelings are tied to very painful experiences, these feelings become more painful. And so working on ourselves is one of the most hardest things, but it is one of the most rewarding things. And, to be able to see yourself go through this journey and see the potential that you have to heal. Like I said, I personally witnessed this with clients, and it is one of the most amazing journeys to just be a part of. But going back to the setbacks, right? I said this is not easy work. It's right. We're coming in here to talk about our most painful experiences, our most darkest days of our lives, and so it's easy to just sometimes not show up for therapy sessions. And again, that's part of the avoidance and part of the PTSD as far as like what keeps this trauma is I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to go through this because I don't want to open those feelings. So, and it's fine. It's absolutely normal, to have a client start the work and then choose not to come back. But there is a point in time when we're ready to do that work. And when the client is ready to do that work, I welcome them back with open doors.
That's wonderful, Sabina. I think I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to go over specifically with on the client side, but my kind of last part of the questions I had was how do you do self-care for you? Because you're helping the survivors, and we also have those who are listening who are helping survivors as partners or parents or siblings. How do you do self-care for you, or what would you advise others to do?
So self care is probably one of the most important things I think is one of the best gifts that we can give for ourselves. And when we are able to take care of ourselves, we can also take care of others. And self care is really figuring out what works best for you when it comes to taking care of your body and your mind. Your mind is always listening, your body never forgets. And
Mm.
so being able to have that balance and the connection between your mind and body is the true self care.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Can you suggest any specific ideas or practices that you found helpful, or you would, have heard others find helpful?
Of course. Again, raise self care also on a spectrum here. Um, our sleep. How are we sleeping? How are we taking care of that? How are you taking care of your body? What kind of physical activity are you engaging in that's taking care of your body. And that could be anything from yoga to going on to walks to, going to the gym. Um, right, how are we eating? So a lot of that. And then also just also knowing what kind of like a lot of the times I'll refer to my clients for like mindfulness intervention. I'm a very huge advocate for that. So mindfulness is more about being in the present moment, because focusing on the present is really kind of the moment that we have. And a quick strategy here is just being aware of a lot of self-reflection. What am I thinking right now? How am I feeling right now? How is my thought and feeling impacting what's going to happen next to me? Deep breathing is also a great strategy for us to be able to reset ourselves, because again, our nervous system at any point can become dysregulated. And when we are able to focus on that breath, we can then reset our nervous system.
Nice. Sabina, that was so helpful. Like for our listeners, I'm sure those of you who have been listening to so many, this was kind of an overview of what's possible with therapy. And I love thinking about it. It's a caterpillar turning into the butterfly and really growing. And I feel like you made it so accessible and welcoming, Sabina. So that was really helpful. Can you think of anything else to encourage our listeners to give us a try? What if they don't connect? Like, they might walk in there, and what should they do if they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not connecting with this person at all? Because you talked about that at the outset. Like, I try and build a rapport first. What if they're like, oh my gosh, this therapist is not for me? What should they do?
And that's, I think that's a great question that you bring up too. It's okay if you do not feel connected with your first therapist, with your second therapist, with your third therapist, because this connection is a key to your healing as well. When you do look for your therapist, I think one of the important things to focus on is ask questions. What do you know about trauma, right? What do you know about PTSD? What does your work look like with trauma survivors? What kind of experience do you have with trauma survivors? What are your sessions structured like? How do you approach PTSD, or how do you approach trauma work? Because that will give you the answer also to help you determine if this person is a good fit for me. Are we going to work well together?
That's perfect. That's so helpful, Sabina. I'm really grateful for your time on the podcast and the gift that you are for all those who've come through your door and gone through the journey with you. I'm sure they've been so well served and helped and empowered. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, continue to find different pathways. You hear on the podcast, there's all kinds of ways to take those steps. And Sabina gave you so many. And a therapist might be just the right next step for some of you. And if you live near Yardley, Pennsylvania, Sabina's right here in this area. So you can find out more about her and her work. Don't forget to check out also the Take Back the Night website for events throughout the year. We have tons going on, 1,600 or so around the globe. So if you're interested in going to a physical event with other survivors, please check those out as well. And together we are thriving and surviving. Take care.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, please.
I just want to add that nobody's meant to go through this alone. This is not something that somebody is meant to go through alone in this process. We are not taught, right, how to effectively manage what has changed inside of us. And, there are therapists out there that can help you go through this process, because you are not meant to go through this alone. Nobody is.
I'm so glad you added that, Sabina. That is critical. I mean, that's part of the podcast purpose is at least, you and I get to talk to each other, but for our listeners, at least you're not alone when you listen in and join us. And some of you might be listening to us when you're falling asleep. Some of you in the car on your commute, on the bus, on the train ride, wherever you are, we are here for you. And that's the whole purpose. So Sabina, thank you for reminding everyone of that important part. So
you're welcome.
Yeah, have a wonderful day. Everyone take care and stay strong.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.